I was actually much more into hip hop at the time in the '90s, much more of like Tupac and Biggie and DMX and Wu Tang and Nas. I mean, those were big influences. Exhibit. I mean, I just was much more into hip hop culture and music. But for me, the breaking point was I didn't get into the materialism, and that's why I see where you got into that in your book, and the dark side of this materialistic culture. And
Yeah.
because I couldn't get into it. My friends would be sitting around watching MTV videos. I'd be like, this is a waste of my time. This is stupid. People are out here
Then
flossing.
and that's very
And I'm like,
ahead,
but
you
come on,
know.
this is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's very ahead of the time to have that mindset back then, because you were able to see the kind of like MK Ultra programming of repeating images and brainwashing, and because it was really at its peak at that point, right? It was the easiest time to brainwash, adolescent America, and of course you were able to see through that, and even see through that the anti-culture was also being peddled by corporations to make money. Things like Limp Bizkit, Manson, Nine Inch Nails, even, it was all still a part of the same like pop. The real anti-culture was something that you had to go seek outside of the channel of MTV and what Viacom was selling. And it must have been so, like, I don't know if you felt lonely or isolated in that time having those mindsets, because that wasn't really popular opinion to turn off MTV.
It was lonely, but that's what I always express to people is that's where that gave me the courage to be able to be an individual, was the
Yeah.
fact that I shut it off early. I didn't have a problem with being alone. I didn't have a problem with my friends, making fun of me or whatever, saying like,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
you're this or that. Or would just be like, I don't give a fuck. Because thankfully I had strong parents. I had a strong mother and I had a strong father. They didn't live together, they were divorced.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
was obviously hurtful, that hurts as a kid to have divorced parents, but each one was strong. So I'd be like, I'm cool with hanging out with my father and, sitting around talking with adults and traveling and going places and, getting to experience things that most people aren't getting to experience. And that's more interesting to me than hanging out at a party, getting
Oh
high
yeah,
on.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure. But don't you feel like millennials don't have a sophisticated adult culture like the way Gen X did? Like, I don't feel like we
Yeah,
have that. Like I was trying to explain this to Brett the other day. Like, there's no like avant-garde, sophisticated adult culture in millennial culture. There's always a sense of like infantilization,
totally.
constant perpetuation of adolescence.
We were the first. I mean, this was what I was looking at in college and like analyzing it, college, post college. I'm looking around and going, this is the first generation in the history of like modern civilization, of recorded history, when you basically have uh, the majority of culture being film, right? At that time, let's say film and music oriented towards kids.
Hmm.
This was never done historically. You had
Yeah,
maturity of culture. You had operas and plays and
yeah,
theater
yeah,
and films that were designed for adults. And
yeah,
then when kids were ready, they could experience it, right? But
yeah.
now, like all this stuff, they said infantilization. It was like the Adam Sandlers and the Will Ferrells, and it was all about like being a basically 40 year old child, man child,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Stepbrother,
oh no, of course when you were in college, of course, like The Hangover and like
right?
Good Luck Chuck and like that type of film, and yeah, no, it was a bit like the 90s bro culture, but a bit on steroids, like at that point. Like this was probably the kind of peak before all the algorithms formed and there wasn't really like one form of arena. But do you feel like your generation and my generation has so much nostalgia for that period because it to them it represents like a sense of order, like out of chaos, like that the internet culture and social media culture is so chaotic that back then things seemed more simple? Or what do you think it
Yeah.
is that has people constantly going back to 99 in their heads?
Well, there's multiple factors to that. To me, the '90s was like both. It was like it was this explosion of we've won the Cold Wars, and it's like materialism and Western materialism has prevailed, and then you get this massive corporate culture that is there, but people still have this sense of freedom because 2001 really was like the fucking death knell of that, right? It was
Mm-hmm. Okay.
psycho-spiritual, right?
Pre
It was
9/11. Yeah. Yeah.
9/11 was like, hey man, war on terror, fear, basically military occupation of your mind and your space, the Patriot
Yeah.
Act. You can't go to a fucking airport without putting your hands up and feeling like you're guilty. I mean, this whole psychology sets in across the culture. So, and I thought I see everything post that including the digitization.
Oh, I get what you're
as
saying.
generation, right?
Yeah.
Of essentially that spirit that was still optimistic. So the 90s, even though there's a dark 90s, and you get into it in your book, the dark side of the materialism and the culture, there was still this like optimism of like, hey,
Okay, I get what you mean.
who walks
I get
around
what
and
you
says
mean.
America's a free country anymore? No one says that. When I grew up, everyone would be like, hey, it's a free country, right? Now no one
Yeah.
says that. You can't say that. You can't do that. You shut the fuck up. It's a free country still.